very interesting that you mentioned the importance of being brave enough to speak your mind about the ongoing political issues, or maybe something that you would like to be fixed, especially as I think over the last few years, in my opinion, and I know to a certain extent this might be influenced by, social media, by ongoing political events, by whatever party I support, but my opinion in the last years, lefts and more of the Democrats in the US and left-leaning parties maybe in Europe have gone too far in their censorship attempts, and it has been revealed. And of course, the right-wing parties have taken much of an advantage, much of a opportunity to swap that around, using that narrative that they're being silenced and etc. But I do think that is true to a certain extent, but often also being exaggerated. So.
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. I think there is a degree of censorship. There's also a degree of self-censorship that we have to be aware of. Now, I'm a liberal Democrat. Liberals believe obviously in freedom of speech. I think it's absolutely crucial that we have that ability. On the other hand, we also speak for minority rights, for human rights. So freedom of speech has always been subject to some form of justified limitation. I think that limitation is when it comes to hate speech, when it comes to illegal content, when it comes to protection of minorities, of children, etc. Finding that balance is not something you do on a sort of ad hoc basis, or we're going to cancel this person or not. Finding that balance to me means looking at what democratic institutions, lawmakers have actually legislated for. There is a hate speech regulation in most countries.
I know, in most countries, yes.
There is a hate speech law. So when it comes to the limitation of what you should or shouldn't say, of what you're allowed and not allowed to say, we have legislation. And I think we need to rely on that rather than making it up on the go. On the other hand, I do think there is a good argument that says that it's very difficult to monitor content, for example, on social media. And there has to be a mechanism to protect people from hate speech, to protect people from racial discrimination or homophobia, misogyny in some form or another. So it's a question of balance. And yes, you're right. There has been a backlash against maybe the kind of censorship and self-censorship that we've seen over the recent past. I'm not sure it's a question of left and right politics so much as it's a question of trying to push certain issues in society. And if you do that too much, there's always going to be a backlash. Now, the reason why the backlash is so strong this time is because populist parties abuse the fact that some people think it's gone too far. And then they're always interested in polarizing people, right? So they will exploit the fact that some people think it's gone too far and turn that into a culture war. And that's dangerous in my view.
And many people don't like those hate speech laws, as you mentioned. And in Canada, I think many of the Canadian and in general internet influencers have voiced their concerns against some of the bills in Canada. I think one of them was Bill C-16, which Jordan Peterson is you know Jordan Peterson?
But only by name. I'm not an expert on the Canadian law, I should say, nor on the exact debate there. But it's a debate that we have everywhere, right?
No, yeah, so Bill C-16 basically, I might be wrong there, but, in my opinion, that basically enforces you to use correct pronouns when addressing somebody who's transgender, somebody who would like to be referred by any of the other pronouns that you would like to refer them to. And yeah, many of the people, I think, voiced their concerns regarding this as to how far this might go. And with social media, I think that's a good argument. I do believe there have to be certain limitations, but it's also hard to, when people are existing in an open space like internet and trying to exchange thoughts. Of course, some of the thoughts and some of the content is going to be is going to be not exactly right for all parts of the community. And yeah, I think that's something that we really have to tackle and really find the balance.
Absolutely. And as you rightly say, it's all about balance. Now, I feel actually quite strongly about self-determination and particularly about transgender people to be able to self-determine their gender, because there is something called the principle of harm. So that for me is where the balance should be drawn. If it doesn't harm anyone, then it should be allowed, essentially. And the same goes for free speech. So in the same way that I don't think it is harmful to anyone to have self-determination in all aspects of your life, not just in terms of sexual identity, but in all other terms, you should be free to be who you want to be. On the other hand, I should be free to say my opinion. And if I think that is not the right balance, or that there are other rights that are limited or harmed by having maybe, too much emphasis on one particular minority, then that's my right and your right to say and to mention. The important thing is that we have the debate, that nobody is censored, that everybody has a right to their opinion. And if somebody feels aggrieved, they need to be able to say so. Because if we ignore them, or if we just put a lid on it and say we don't want to hear it, then, it's not going to go away. It's going to go underground. It's going to go on alternative media. And eventually it's going to find its revenge, usually supported by one of the far-right populist parties. And that's exactly what I can see happening, not just in Canada, in this country as well, and in most Western liberal democracies across the world.
How would you describe a populist leader?
I think a populist leader is somebody who exploits other people's legitimate concerns and turns them into a form of fear, panic, or hatred, intentionally, with the intention of polarizing society, with the intention of gaining power in a democracy. Because the interesting thing is that populism, if you want, is the flip side of democracy. It only exists inside democracies, really, because, well, if you don't have elections, you don't need to convince people. You don't need to turn them around, if you want, or manipulate them because they can't vote anyway. So inside in democracy, you will always have somebody who is trying to speak for the people, some construct that they think will unite people against an elite. And that elite, that is either people like you and me, sort of the educated metropolitan people. It could be a political elite. It could be the deep state. It could be anything really that people like to hate, or that people certainly feel they have nothing in common with. And populism strives in situations where I think liberal democracies have failed because they've left people behind. So a populist leader is somebody who's clever, somebody who knows how to communicate with people, a demagogue, somebody who doesn't really care about ideologies or programs. They only care about power. And once they have power, well, they may not be able to fulfill all their promises and lose that power. Or, a bit like Viktor Orban, for example, they may reinvent themselves and try to find new scapegoats and new elites they can rant against, like the EU, or like migrants, in order to stay in power. In any case, they're dangerous and shouldn't be underestimated, and they're everywhere.
And do you have such in the UK? And I probably anticipate your answer, but do you have such in the UK, and how big of a threat they are to the
So you might be surprised at the answer, because beyond the obvious, which is Reform UK, which is very similar to the kind of national populist parties that you see on the right-hand side of the spectrum in lots and lots of European countries and countries across the globe. You have people like Jeremy Corbyn on the left, who are clearly using populist means, promising people free internet or whatever it was, which was very effective actually with a lot of people. And although Corbyn and the left-wing populists in the UK didn't gain much traction, or rather were purged by the centre-left, by the Labour Party, I think they are still around. But of course, it is Nigel Farage's Brexit party that is this sort of archetypical nationalist, populist, right extreme party in the UK, and they're coming. The only reason why they're not here yet, or not in greater numbers, is because of our rather unfair electoral system. So 4 members of parliament would have been 96 under a proportional representation system based on the percentage of votes that they got. Next time around in 2029, I bet you they will know how to game the system, and they will be able to get many, many more MPs. So they are coming. I think we need to be very well aware of that threat, and we need to do something, we being the centrist parties and those people who don't want to see our society more polarized. We need to wake up and do something, and soon.